Elena Carter had always believed in love, the kind that endures, that weathers every storm, that finds strength even in the darkest hours. For 6 years, she had devoted herself to building a home, not just a house, but a place filled with warmth, laughter, and love. She had married Nathan Carter with the hope of growing old together, of sharing life's burdens and joys. But as time passed, that dream began to crack, splintering under the weight of expectations that only she seemed to carry. The change had been gradual, almost imperceptible at first. Nathan had once been attentive, loving, and supportive, but over the years, he had become distant, absorbed in his work and the endless scrolling of his phone. At first, Elena told herself it was normal, that marriage went through phases. But when his mother, Margaret Carter, moved into their home, everything unraveled faster than she could hold it together. Margaret had always been a force of nature, domineering, opinionated, and deeply rooted in traditions that saw women as caretakers and men as unquestioned leaders of the household. From the moment she arrived, she made her disapproval of Elena clear. The way she cooked wasn't right. The way she dressed the children wasn't proper. The way she kept the house wasn't good enough. But the worst part was that Nathan never defended her. He would merely shrug, chuckling at his mother's sharp words, or worse, agreeing with her. Every morning, Elena would rise before the sun, moving through the house like a shadow. She would prepare breakfast, pack lunches for their two children, Noah and Lily, and make sure they were dressed and ready for school. Meanwhile, Margaret would sleep until late morning, only emerging when hunger finally forced her from bed, demanding a hot meal as though it was her birthright. Nathan, of course, remained oblivious to it all. He would sit in the living room, absorbed in his phone, scrolling through endless feeds of meaningless content, while his wife scrambled to meet the impossible expectations placed upon her. At first, Elena had swallowed her frustration, reminding herself that Margaret was an elderly woman who deserved respect. She had tried to be patient, had reminded herself that family was about compromise, but patience could only stretch so far before it snapped. And with every passing day, resentment grew inside her like an untreated wound, festering beneath the surface. She felt invisible, like a servant rather than a wife. And worst of all, Nathan never noticed. One morning, as Elena juggled frying eggs, packing lunches, and finding Noah's missing school shoe, she stole a glance at her husband. There he sat, feet propped up, phone in hand, scrolling through his screen without a care in the world. Her chest tightened. He didn't see her. He didn't see the exhaustion that painted dark circles under her eyes, the way her hands trembled from sheer fatigue, the way her heart ached under the weight of being so profoundly alone in a marriage that was supposed to be a partnership. Something inside her snapped. She slammed the frying pan onto the stove, the loud clang cutting through the silence. Nathan barely flinched. Anger, raw and unchecked, surged through her veins. "Do you even see me, Nathan?" she demanded, her voice sharp as a blade. Nathan finally looked up, frowning as though she had just interrupted something important. "What are you talking about?" Elena let out a bitter laugh, shaking her head. "I do everything. I wake up before everyone. I cook, I clean, I take care of the kids, I work. And you just sit there scrolling through your damn phone like nothing around you matters." Nathan sighed, exasperated. Elena, why are you making such a big deal out of this? It's just breakfast. Just breakfast, she repeated, her voice rising. And the laundry, the cleaning, the kids, your mother, it's all on me, Nathan. And when I ask for help, I'm lazy. Nathan scoffed, rolling his eyes. Only lazy and useless women need housekeepers. How hard is it to make breakfast and get 2 kids ready for school? Elena stared at him, her heart pounding in her chest. It wasn't just exhaustion that made it hurt. It was the realization that he didn't care, that he no longer saw her as his partner, only as someone who was supposed to handle everything without question. In that moment, she knew something had to change, because if she stayed like this, unseen and unheard, she wasn't sure she would survive much longer. Elena stood in the middle of the kitchen, her breath coming in short, uneven bursts. The silence that followed her outburst was deafening. Nathan's indifferent expression, the way he barely looked up from his phone, made her stomach twist in a way that felt like betrayal. For years, she had swallowed her frustration, convinced herself that marriage meant sacrifice, that love meant endurance. But as she stared at the man she had once thought she would grow old with, she realized something chilling. She wasn't just exhausted, she was drowning. Nathan exhaled loudly, shaking his head as if she were a child throwing a tantrum. You're overreacting, he muttered, standing up and stretching lazily. You act like you're the only woman in the world taking care of a house. It's not that hard, Elena. You just need to stop whining and do your job. His words hit like a slap. Elena's hands trembled, not from fear, but from the sheer force of anger surging through her. Do my job? Was that what she was to him now? Just someone to keep the house running, to make sure he and the children were fed, to ensure his mother was comfortable, while she slowly withered away from neglect? A bitter laugh escaped her lips, surprising even herself. My job, she echoed, voice laced with disbelief. And what exactly is your job, Nathan? Sitting on your ass while I run this house like a damn machine, ignoring me while your mother treats me like a maid. You think just because I don't complain, it's easy. Nathan groaned, rubbing his temples like she was the one giving him a headache. Elena, I don't have time for this. I have work to do. If you're so tired, maybe go take a nap instead of yelling. A nap. He thought this could be solved with a nap. Before she could speak, a voice cut through the tension. What is all this noise so early in the morning? Margaret's sharp tones sliced through the air as she walked into the kitchen, dressed in her robe, her face twisted in disapproval. Elena, if you have time to shout, you have time to cook breakfast. Elena turned slowly, a cold, unfamiliar calm settling over her. Breakfast is on the stove, Margaret, but maybe you should start learning to make your own. Margaret's eyes widened, as if Elena had just spoken a foreign language. Excuse me? You heard me, Elena said, her voice steady. You expect me to serve you like I have nothing better to do, like I don't work, like I don't work, like I don't have 2 children who need me. I'm done. Margaret let out a scoff, looking to her son for support. Nathan, do you hear how she's talking to me? This is the kind of wife you married? No respect, no patience, no patience. Nathan didn't even hesitate. "Mom, she's just in one of her moods," he said dismissively. "She'll calm down." Elena felt something inside her shatter. She had fought for this marriage. She had sacrificed pieces of herself, hoping, praying that one day Nathan would wake up and see her, that he would recognize her efforts, appreciate her love. But he wasn't going to. Not now. Maybe not ever. She took a slow, deep breath, then turned away from both of them. Without another word, she walked out of the kitchen and into the bedroom. Her hands moved on their own, reaching for the closet, pulling out a small suitcase. She packed only what was necessary. Her essentials, a few changes of clothes, her phone. Her heart pounded. Her breath came in sharp, shallow bursts, but she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. She couldn't stop. For the first time in years, Elena was making a choice for herself. She stepped back into the living room where Nathan and Margaret were still talking, still complaining. They barely noticed her until she reached for her car keys. Nathan frowned. "Where are you going?" She met his gaze, steady and unflinching. "Out." Nathan let out a short laugh. "Elena, don't be dramatic." She didn't respond. She didn't have to. Instead, she walked past him, past Margaret's scandalized gasp, past the messy house, the morning chaos, past the life that had drained her for too long. The door shut behind her, and for the first time in forever, she felt like she could finally breathe. Nathan Carter woke up to an eerie silence. The house, usually filled with the sounds of Elena bustling in the kitchen, the children whining about getting ready for school, and his mother issuing demands from the couch, was unsettlingly quiet. He sat up, rubbing his face, his mind still groggy. His phone, lying on the nightstand, had no missed calls, no messages, no good morning texts from Elena. With a frown, he climbed out of bed and stepped into the hallway, expecting to see her in the kitchen. But instead, he was met with the sight of emptiness. No breakfast cooking, no children dressed and ready to go, no trace of the woman who had run this house like a well-oiled machine. A strange feeling crept into his chest, something he couldn't quite name. Discomfort? Concern? Guilt? Shrugging it off, he walked into the kitchen and found his mother sitting at the table, sipping her coffee with a look of complete ease. "Where's Elena?" he asked, his voice thick from sleep. Margaret barely glanced up. "How should I know? She left early, I suppose. I woke up and she was gone." Nathan frowned. "She didn't say anything to you?" Margaret scoffed. "She barely acknowledges me anymore. You let that girl get away with too much, Nathan. If you don't discipline a wife, she'll start thinking she's the one in charge." He ignored his mother's usual complaints and reached for his phone, dialing Elena's number. It rang once, then twice before going straight to voicemail. He tried again. Same result. His frown deepened. Elena never turned off her phone. A small pang of unease settled in his stomach. But before he could dwell on it, a tiny voice pulled him back. "Daddy?" He turned to see Lily, their 6-year-old daughter, standing in the hallway, rubbing her tired eyes. "Where's Mommy?" she asked, her voice small. Nathan forced a reassuring smile. "She must have left early for work, sweetheart. Don't worry, she'll be back." But even as he said the words, they felt hollow. The morning continued messy and chaotic without Elena there to hold everything together. Nathan had never realized just how much work it took to get two kids ready for school. Noah couldn't find his socks. Lily refused to eat breakfast. The kitchen was a disaster. He burned the toast, spilled the juice, and by the time he finally got them in the car, they were late. His frustration grew, but there was no one to blame but himself. After dropping them off, he returned home, expecting Elena to be back. But the house was still empty, cold in a way he hadn't noticed before. He hesitated before dialing her number again. Voicemail. Again. His jaw tightened. Nathan had always assumed that no matter what, Elena would always be there. That no matter how much she complained, how many times she sighed in exhaustion, how many times she pleaded for help, she would stay, because that's what wives did. They stayed, they endured. But she hadn't. She was gone. His mother, still lounging in the living room, barely lifted her head from the magazine she was flipping through. Stop worrying. She'll come crawling back once she realizes she can't survive out there on her own. Something inside him twisted. A few days ago, he might have believed that. But now, staring at the empty house, feeling the weight of her absence, he wasn't so sure. For the first time in their marriage, he had no idea if Elena was coming back. The evening air hung heavy as Nathan Carter pulled into the driveway, the weight of the day pressing against his shoulders. He had gone through the motions, dropping the kids off, sitting at work, pretending to focus, but his mind had been elsewhere. Everywhere he looked, he expected to see Elena. The thought of her still haunted him, not because she was loud, but because her absence was deafening. As he stepped inside, the house was quiet, save for the hum of the television where his mother sat, flipping through channels without a care in the world. The smell of stale air and uneaten breakfast lingered, a reminder of just how wrong everything felt without Elena there. He dropped his keys onto the counter and loosened his tie. Still nothing. He asked, though he already knew the answer. Margaret barely looked up. "You're acting like she vanished into thin air," she scoffed. "She'll be back once she realizes she has no choice." Nathan gritted his teeth. "And what if she doesn't?" Margaret rolled her eyes. "Nathan, grow up. She's a woman. Where's she gonna go? She has two kids. No real way to support herself. She'll come crawling back the moment she realizes the world doesn't coddle women like she wants it to." His stomach twisted. No real way to support herself? He knew his mother meant it as an insult, but it hit him differently. For the first time, he wondered, had Elena been trapped all these years? Had she stayed not because she wanted to, but because she thought she had no other option? The thought unsettled him in a way he wasn't ready to face. Before he could respond, Margaret straightened, a smug smile creeping onto her face. "You know, I actually have a solution for all this." Nathan pinched the bridge of his nose. "Mom, I don't need one of your—" "No, listen to me," she cut him off, a knowing glint in her eyes. "I spoke to Mrs. Thompson today, and she mentioned that her niece, Grace, just moved into town. Sweet girl raised right, knows how to take care of a home. She'd be perfect for you and the children." Nathan froze, blinking. "What?" Margaret, oblivious to the tension now crackling in the air, continued, "You need someone who understands a woman's place. Someone who won't argue, who'll take care of things without all this drama. She turned to him with a satisfied smirk. I invited her over for dinner tomorrow. You'll see, Nathan. She's nothing like Elena. His hands curled into fists at his sides. You what? Oh, don't act so dramatic, she sighed. It's not like you're married anymore. Elena left, remember? If she really cared, she'd be here. Instead, she abandoned her home. Something inside him snapped. She didn't abandon us, he said, voice low and sharp. She left because she had no choice, because she was exhausted, because I let her down. Margaret scoffed. Oh, please, don't start with that nonsense. You're a man, Nathan. It's not your job to worry about cooking and cleaning. You work, you provide. That's enough. Enough? He laughed bitterly, shaking his head. You think throwing money at a family is enough? That sitting around while my wife breaks herself to keep this house running is enough? Margaret's lips pressed into a thin line. This is exactly why she left. Because you let her believe she deserved more than her place. Nathan stared at his mother, really stared at her, and for the first time he saw the truth. She wasn't trying to fix anything. She was trying to control it. Just like she had controlled every part of his life since he was a boy. He exhaled slowly, his voice calm but firm. Cancel the dinner. Margaret's eyes flashed. Excuse me. I said, cancel the damn dinner, Mom. He met her gaze, unflinching. I don't need a new wife. I need to fix what I broke. Margaret opened her mouth, but he wasn't listening anymore. For the first time in his life, Nathan Carter had made a decision without his mother's approval. Nathan Carter had always believed he had control over his life, that his choices were his own, that his family was stable, and that his marriage, despite its rough patches, was unbreakable. But now, as he sat in the dimly lit living room, staring at the untouched dinner on the table, he realized just how blind he had been. Elena was gone, and for the first time, he wasn't sure if she was ever coming back. His mother's words still lingered in the air, thick with manipulation. She abandoned you. She'll come crawling back when she realizes she has no choice. But what if she didn't? The thought gnawed at him in a way he hadn't expected, because deep down he knew Elena wasn't weak. She wasn't the type to leave on a whim, to storm out just to make a point. No, she had endured. She had carried this household, fought for their marriage, swallowed her exhaustion day after day until it finally consumed her. And instead of listening, instead of helping, he had dismissed her. He had let her go without even trying to stop her. The creak of the staircase pulled him from his thoughts. He turned to see Noah, their 8-year-old son, standing at the bottom of the steps, his small face tight with uncertainty. Dad? His voice was soft, hesitant. Nathan straightened. Yeah, buddy? Noah bit his lip, then slowly walked closer. Is Mom coming home soon? The question hit like a punch to the gut. Nathan opened his mouth, but the words didn't come. What was he supposed to say? That he didn't know. That he had no idea where she was. That he had driven her away and now had to live with the consequences. Instead, he forced a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. She just needed some time, bud. She'll be back soon. Noah studied him carefully, far too perceptive for his age. Are you sure? Nathan hesitated, then reached out, resting a hand on his son's shoulder. I promise I'll do everything I can to bring her home. It was the only promise he could make. The next morning, Nathan woke to the smell of breakfast. Eggs, bacon, coffee. For a split second, his heart jumped, a desperate hope surging through him. Elena, she came back. But as he stepped into the kitchen, that hope shattered. It wasn't Elena. It was Grace. The young woman sat at the table, her posture perfect, her hands folded neatly in her lap, a warm, demure smile on her lips, and across from her, Margaret beamed like a queen presenting her best offering. Nathan stopped cold. What the hell is this? Margaret glanced up innocently. Breakfast. His jaw clenched. I told you to cancel dinner. She waved a hand dismissively. Dinner was cancelled. This is breakfast. Besides, Grace was kind enough to come by and help out, seeing as how you're struggling. Nathan's eyes darted to Grace, who smiled sweetly. It's nice to meet you, Mr. Carter. I hope you don't mind. I just thought I could be of some assistance. He exhaled sharply, rubbing his temple. Listen, I don't know what my mother told you, but I don't need a new wife. Grace's expression didn't falter. Of course not, sir. I'm just here to help. I understand how difficult things must be for you right now. Nathan turned to his mother, voice tight. Mom, enough. Margaret huffed, crossing her arms. Nathan, stop being so stubborn. You have 2 children to think about. You can't expect to run a home by yourself. Grace is a good girl. She can take care of things while you figure out what to do with Elena. A heavy silence fell over the room. Nathan did have 2 children to think about, but the last thing he needed was a replacement for the woman he had driven away. His gaze hardened. Elena is my wife, and I don't need anyone taking her place. Grace's smile faltered for the first time. Margaret's lips pressed into a thin, displeased line. But Nathan didn't care. For the first time in weeks, he had clarity. And no matter what it took, he was going to bring Elena home. Nathan Carter stood in the middle of the kitchen, his jaw tight, his patience hanging by a thread. The tension in the room was suffocating. Margaret's plan had failed, and she knew it. Grace, with her sweet smile and perfect posture, had been meant to slide into Elena's place seamlessly, to make him forget the woman who had built this home from the ground up. But Margaret had underestimated something crucial. Elena wasn't replaceable. With a sharp exhale, Nathan turned to Grace. I appreciate your time, but this isn't going to work. You should go. Grace's eyes flickered with something unreadable. Disappointment, embarrassment, relief. For a moment, he thought she might argue, but instead she gave a small nod. Of course, Mr. Carter. Margaret, however, was less gracious. Nathan, don't be ridiculous, she snapped. The children need a woman in this house. You need a woman in this house. You need a woman in this house. Nathan's head snapped toward his mother, and this time he didn't hold back. No, Mom. What I needed was to be a better husband before my wife walked out that door. His voice was steel, his frustration cutting through every word. And what I need now is to fix what I broke, not find a replacement to clean up my mess. Margaret's mouth fell open, but before she could argue, Nathan was already walking past her, already grabbing his keys, already done listening. As he stepped outside, the crisp morning air did little to cool his anger. He climbed into his car, gripping the wheel tighter than necessary. He needed to find Elena. He needed to find Elena. He needed to tell her he understood now, that he saw her, truly saw her, in a way he never had before. But where was she? For the past week, she had been nothing but a ghost. No messages, no calls, no clues. Her parents refused to tell him anything, and he couldn't blame them. If someone had treated his daughter the way he had treated Elena, he wouldn't give them a damn thing either. But there had to be a way. As he drove aimlessly, the realization settled over him like a weight. Maybe she didn't want to be found. Maybe she was finally free of the burden of their home, of him, and she had no intention of coming back. The thought made his stomach twist, but he deserved that fear. His phone buzzed against the dashboard, jerking him from his thoughts. A call from an unknown number. He hesitated for half a second before answering. "Mr. Carter," a woman's voice said on the other end, professional but warm. "Yes." His heartbeat quickened. "My name is Dr. Evelyn Moore. I'm calling from St. Mary's Hospital." Nathan's grip on the wheel tightened. "Hospital?" "Yes, sir. I wanted to inform you that your wife, Elena, has been under our care for the past few weeks." The world tilted. Nathan felt his chest constrict, his breath shallow. "She's in the hospital?" "She checked herself in not long after she left home," the doctor explained. "It was a high-risk pregnancy, and she needed to be somewhere safe, where she could be monitored." His pulse thundered in his ears. "Pregnancy?" The doctor paused, as if choosing her words carefully. "She gave birth this morning, Mr. Carter, a healthy baby boy." For the first time in his entire life, Nathan Carter felt completely, utterly helpless. A baby, their baby. He had spent the past weeks believing Elena had abandoned him, when in reality, she had been fighting to survive, fighting for their child. His voice cracked when he finally spoke. "She never told me. She said she couldn't afford the stress," Dr. Moore said gently. "She needed a calm environment for both herself and the baby." Nathan swallowed hard, shame crashing over him like a tidal wave. She hadn't left because she wanted to. She had left because she had no choice. "I need to see her," he whispered, already shifting the car into drive. "I think that would be a good idea." And with that, Nathan Carter sped toward the one person he should have fought for all along. Nathan Carter barely remembered the drive to St. Mary's Hospital. His hands gripped the wheel, knuckles white, his heart hammering so hard against his ribs that he could feel it in his throat. A baby. Elena had been carrying their child, struggling, suffering, while he had been too blind to see what was right in front of him. Guilt coiled around his chest like a vice, each breath harder than the last. She hadn't abandoned him. She hadn't abandoned him. She had been protecting herself, protecting their baby. And all this time, he had let his pride and his mother's poison convince him otherwise. When he pulled into the hospital parking lot, he barely registered turning off the engine before he was out of the car, moving through the halls like a man possessed. He needed to see her. He needed to see them. At the front desk, a nurse looked up. startled by his urgency. "I'm looking for Elena Carter," he said, his voice rough, strained. The nurse typed into the computer, then gave him a small, knowing smile. "Room 304, she said. "She and the baby are doing well." His chest squeezed at those words. The baby, his baby. He nodded his thanks and took the stairs two at a time, his breath uneven. He wasn't sure what he would find when he walked into that room. Would she be angry? Would she be angry? Would she send him away? Would she even want to see him? When he reached the door, his fingers hesitated on the handle. For the first time in his life, Nathan Carter was afraid. Afraid of what he had done. Afraid of what he had done. Afraid of what he had lost. But there was no turning back now. He inhaled deeply, then pushed the door open. The room was quiet, except for the soft beeping of machines and the faintest sound of steady breathing. And there she was, Elena. She was lying in the hospital bed, her face pale but peaceful, exhaustion lining her features. And in her arms, wrapped in a blue blanket, was the tiniest, most perfect thing he had ever seen. His son. Elena's eyes fluttered open at the sound of the door. When she saw him, there was no anger, no immediate resentment, just a slow, measured gaze, as if she was seeing him for the first time in a long time. Nathan's throat tightened. "Elena," he whispered. She looked down at the baby in her arms before meeting his eyes again. "You found me," she said softly. His chest ached at the words. "You found me." "I should have never lost you," he admitted, stepping closer, his eyes locked on the small bundle in her arms. "Elena, His voice caught and he swallowed hard. "I didn't know. I didn't see what I was doing to you." She studied him, searching for something in his face. "And now?" He exhaled shakily. "Now I know that I failed you. I let my mother control our marriage. I ignored you when you needed me the most. His voice cracked, and he ran a hand through his hair. "I lost you because I was too damn blind to see how much you were carrying on your own." Elena looked at him for a long moment, then gently shifted, revealing more of the baby's tiny face. "Nathan, meet your son." His breath caught, his son. A lump formed in his throat as he stepped closer, hesitating, afraid to break the moment. "He's perfect," he whispered. Elena's lips curved into a tight smile. "He looks like you." That single sentence broke something inside him, a deep, aching sorrow for all the moments he had already missed, for not being there when she needed him, for not protecting her the way he should have. "Can I hold him?" he asked, his voice barely above a breath. Elena hesitated, just for a second, before carefully passing the baby into his arms. And the moment Nathan held his son for the first time, the world shifted. He had spent so much time running from responsibility, from emotions, from the weight of his own failures. But standing there holding his child, everything became painfully, beautifully clear. This was his family, and he would do whatever it took to fix what he had broken. Nathan held his son close, feeling the small, steady rise and fall of his tiny chest. The baby was so light, so fragile, yet in that moment, he carried more weight than anything Nathan had ever held before. His fingers trembled slightly as he traced the soft curve of his son's cheek, overwhelmed by the sheer reality of it. This was his child, his blood, his responsibility. He glanced up at Elena, who was watching him carefully, exhaustion evident in her features. She had been through so much, alone. The thought nearly crushed him. "I should have been here," he murmured, his voice thick with regret. "I should have known." Elena sighed, shifting slightly against the pillows. "But you didn't." Her tone wasn't cruel, just honest. Nathan swallowed hard. "I know, and I hate myself for it." A silence settled between them, filled only by the soft sounds of the hospital room. Finally, Elena spoke. "Do you really understand, Nathan? Or do you just feel guilty?" The question hit like a punch to the gut, because there was a difference. Guilt was fleeting, an emotion that faded once the moment passed. But understanding, meant doing better, being better. Nathan met her gaze, his grip on their son tightening just slightly. "I understand now," he said firmly. "I understand what I put you through, how much you carried on your own. I understand that I let my mother treat you like a servant while I stood by and did nothing. I understand that I made you feel unseen." He took a shaky breath. "And I swear to you, Elena, I will never make that mistake again." She didn't respond right away. Instead, she studied him, searching for something in his face. He didn't look away. He wanted her to see that he meant it. Finally, she sighed, closing her eyes for a moment. "Nathan, I don't want to come back to the same life I left." "You won't," he promised immediately. "Things will be different. I'll make sure of it." Elena let out a dry laugh. "You say that now, but will you still say it when the house is a mess? When the kids are late for school? When your mother comes knocking, demanding things be done her way?" Nathan's jaw clenched. He had let his mother control too much for too long. That made Elena pause. "What?" "I told her to leave," he admitted. "I told her she ruined our marriage, and I wasn't going to let her ruin my life too." He hesitated before adding, "She tried to set me up with another woman." Elena's eyes widened slightly. "She did what?" Nathan let out a humorless chuckle. "She brought some girl over for breakfast. Said she'd be a better wife than you." He shook his head. "I told her to leave, and I meant it." Elena exhaled, shaking her head in disbelief. "And you think that's enough?" "No," he admitted. "I know it's not, but it's a start." She went quiet again, looking down at their son, who had drifted off to sleep in Nathan's arms. Her fingers brushed against the baby's tiny hand, and for the first time since he walked into that room, he saw uncertainty in her eyes. "You really want me to come back?" she asked softly. Nathan didn't hesitate. "More than anything." She looked up at him then, meeting his gaze fully. Then, "Prove it." His heart pounded. "Tell me how." Elena took a deep breath. "For the next month, you handle everything. The house, the kids, the responsibilities. Do it alone. No housekeeper. No help. If you can do that, if you truly understand what I've been through, then maybe." Nathan didn't blink. Didn't even think. Done. Because if proving himself to her meant carrying the weight she had shouldered for so long, then he would do it. And this time, he wouldn't fail. Nathan had always thought of himself as a capable man. He handled high-pressure deals at work, made decisions that affected entire teams, and prided himself on staying composed in difficult situations. But nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared him for the chaos that awaited him at home. The first morning without Elena was a disaster. The alarm blared at 6 a.m., but he hit snooze 3 times before dragging himself out of bed. By then, Noah was already knocking on his door, complaining that he couldn't find his school uniform. Nathan groggily waved him off, mumbling something about checking the laundry, only to realize the laundry hadn't been done in days. He rushed to the kids' rooms only to find Lily still curled up under her blanket, refusing to get up. Mommy wakes me up, Mommy wakes me up nicely, she mumbled. You just sound mad. Nathan sighed, rubbing his temple. This was harder than he thought. By the time he had gotten them both dressed, in wrinkled clothes he had pulled out of the hamper, he realized he had completely forgotten about breakfast. He scrambled to the kitchen, hoping for something quick, only to find that the fridge was almost empty. How had Elena kept track of everything? With no time to cook, he threw together peanut butter sandwiches, which Noah immediately rejected. Dad, I can't take a peanut butter sandwich for lunch. That's embarrassing, Noah groaned. Nathan exhaled sharply. Fine. What do you usually eat? Noah gave him a look, like he had just asked how to breathe. Mom makes homemade pasta, or grilled cheese with the crust cut off, or chicken wraps. Nathan stared at him. Was he married to a superhero? With no time to argue, he stuffed the sandwiches into lunch bags and ushered them out the door. But just as they reached the car, Lily burst into tears. My shoes, she wailed. I can't go without my favorite shoes. Nathan clenched his jaw, patience wearing dangerously thin. Lily, we don't have time. I want Mommy, she screamed, tears rolling down her cheeks. Something inside Nathan cracked. This wasn't just about shoes. This wasn't just about a rushed morning. His kids missed their mother, and no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't be her. Swallowing the lump in his throat, he knelt in front of Lily, trying to steady his voice. I know you miss Mommy, sweetheart. I do too. Lily sniffled, rubbing her eyes. She always knows where my shoes are. Nathan nodded, then gently took her hand. How about we look for them together? It took 10 more minutes of searching before they finally found the shoes buried under the couch. By the time they got in the car, they were officially late for school. Nathan barely had a moment to breathe before heading to work, where everything felt wrong. His mind wasn't in the meetings. His emails were full of errors. Even his assistant noticed, hesitating before finally saying, Mr. Carter, you don't look so good. He didn't feel so good. By the time he picked the kids up from school, he was exhausted. But there was no time to rest. There was dinner to cook, homework to check, laundry to do, dishes piling up in the sink. This was just one day. Elena had done this for years. As he stood at the kitchen sink, scrubbing plates with aching hands, the weight of it all settled deep in his chest. This wasn't just hard. This wasn't just hard. This was relentless. How had he never seen it? How had he ignored her for so long? And worse, what if it was too late to fix? The exhaustion set in quicker than Nathan expected. Days blurred together in an endless cycle of waking up before dawn, scrambling to get the kids ready, packing lunches, dropping them off at school, rushing to work, coming home to cook, cleaning up, checking homework, cooing laundry, and somehow making sure the house didn't fall apart. There was never a moment to breathe, never a second to just stop. By the end of the first week, he had dark circles under his eyes, his patience was running razor thin, and his entire body ached. And yet, this was only a fraction of what Elena had endured for years. He felt it most at night. Once the kids were finally in bed, once the house was silent, he would sit alone in the dimly lit living room, staring at the pile of unfolded laundry, the dishes still soaking in the sink, the forgotten toys scattered across the floor. This was what Elena saw every night. And yet, she had never just sat there. She had kept going. One evening, as he loaded the dishwasher, Noah walked in, his face uncertain. "Dad?" Nathan turned, wiping his hands on a towel. "Yeah, buddy?" Noah hesitated before asking, "Is Mommy ever coming home?" The question struck harder than Nathan expected. Is she? He swallowed the lump in his throat. "I hope so," he admitted. "I'm trying to show her things will be different." Noah kicked at the floor. "Mommy always did everything. You never helped her." Nathan's chest tightened. "I know." "She cried a lot," Noah added quietly. "At night, when she thought we were asleep." Nathan's breath caught in his throat. He had never known that. He had been in the same house, just a few rooms away, completely oblivious to the silent pain his wife had been carrying. "I don't want her to be sad anymore," Noah murmured. Nathan knelt in front of him, placing a hand on his son's shoulder. "Neither do I, buddy. And I swear to you, I'm going to make it right." Noah nodded, seeming to accept that answer before heading back to bed. But Nathan sat there, the weight of his son's words pressing down on him. She cried at night. How had he let it get this bad? By the third week, Nathan wasn't just exhausted. He was drowning. The kids were late to school twice. The fridge was empty because he kept forgetting to go grocery shopping. Laundry piled up so high that Lily had to wear mismatched socks to school. And work? He was barely holding on. He finally understood. It wasn't just about doing the chores. It was the mental load. The way Elena had to remember everything. School events, meal planning, grocery lists, doctor's appointments, cleaning schedules, bedtime routines. It wasn't just physical exhaustion. It was the sheer mental weight of managing a home and family alone. One night, after putting the kids to bed, Nathan sat at the kitchen table and called Elena. His hands were clammy as the phone rang. He half expected it to go to voicemail, but after 3 rings, she picked up. "Nathan," she said, her voice cautious. For a moment, he couldn't speak. Just hearing her voice made his throat tighten. Finally, he exhaled. "I get it now, Elena." Silence. He ran a hand over his face. "I thought I understood before, but I didn't. Not really. Everything you did, every single day, it's impossible to do alone. And I left you to do it all by yourself for years." He swallowed. "I'm so sorry." Another pause. Then a quiet breath from the other end. "I cried at night," she said softly. Nathan closed his eyes. "I know." A shaky exhale. "I don't know if I can come back, Nathan. I need to be sure this isn't just guilt, that you've really changed." He nodded, even though she couldn't see it. "I understand." Another pause, then, softly, One more week. Relief flooded his chest. One more week. One more chance to prove he was worth coming home to. Nathan had never counted down the days so desperately before. One more week. That's what Elena had given him. One final chance to prove that he wasn't the same man who had let her break under the weight of their home, their life, their family. And he was determined not to waste it. But determination didn't make the work any easier. The mornings were still chaos. Lily still refused to wake up on time. Noah still grumbled about breakfast. Lunches were still thrown together last minute, and he had officially run out of clean socks for himself. But the difference now, he didn't complain. He didn't roll his eyes or act like it wasn't his job. He did it, even when he was exhausted, even when work was piling up, even when he wanted to collapse at the end of the day. Because that's what Elena had done for years. And now he saw her in everything. He saw her in the way Lily liked her apple slices peeled, because Mommy always does it like that. He saw her in the way Noah double-checked his homework, because Mommy would want me to get this right. He saw her in the empty spot beside him at the dinner table, in the silence of the evenings when there should have been soft laughter, in the warmth that was missing from the house. She was everywhere, and yet she was gone. Nathan had spent so many years believing that just because he worked long hours and put food on the table, he had done enough, that his contribution to their marriage had been sufficient. But now he understood what it meant to truly be a partner. It wasn't about money. It wasn't about providing. It was about being there. In the little moments, in the hard moments, in the everyday struggles that he had once ignored. By the end of the week, something strange happened. He stopped feeling like he was struggling. He started waking up earlier without hitting snooze. He planned meals instead of scrambling at the last second. He made time to sit with the kids, to actually listen instead of rushing through conversations. And for the first time in years, the house didn't feel like a battlefield. It felt like a home. On Friday night, as he tucked Lily into bed, she wrapped her tiny arms around his neck and whispered, "I think you're doing better, Daddy." His throat tightened. "Yeah," she nodded sleepily. "But I still miss Mommy." He pressed a kiss to her forehead, his voice thick. "Me too, sweetheart." And he meant it. With everything in him, he meant it. The next morning, Nathan stood in the kitchen, making breakfast, not just for the kids, but for her. He didn't know if she would come home today, or tomorrow, or if she would change her mind entirely. But he was ready. And when the door finally opened, and Elena walked inside, holding their newborn son in her arms, the air shifted. He turned slowly, heart pounding. She looked at him, eyes scanning the room. The kids, the breakfast on the table, the man in front of her. And for the first time in a long time, she saw something different. Nathan stood frozen, his heart hammering in his chest as Elena stepped through the door. It had been months since she had left, since their home had felt like it was missing a piece. And now, here she was, holding their newborn son, looking around like she wasn't sure if she belonged anymore. The kids were the first to react. "Mommy." Lily and Noah ran to her, their tiny arms wrapping around her waist, burying their faces into her as if afraid she might disappear again. Elena, let out a shaky breath, kneeling down carefully so she could hold them both, her fingers running through their hair, her lips pressing against their foreheads. Nathan swallowed hard, watching the scene unfold, not daring to move. He had spent the last month proving to himself, to his children, to his children, to his home, that he could change. Now he needed to prove it to her. When she finally stood up again, her eyes met his. He saw the uncertainty there, the hesitation, the wall she had built up to protect herself from him. And he didn't blame her for it. He took a slow, careful step forward. Elena. She adjusted their son in her arms, nodding slightly. Nathan, his name in her voice. It nearly undid him. He cleared his throat, his fingers gripping the counter behind him, to keep himself grounded. You came back. She exhaled, glancing around the house. The kitchen was spotless. Breakfast was prepared. The laundry was folded neatly on the couch. The kids were clean and happy. It was nothing like the home she had left behind. I said I would, she murmured. Nathan nodded. And I said I'd be ready. A silence stretched between them, thick with the weight of everything unspoken. Then Elena broke it. I don't want to walk back into the same life I left, Nathan. Her voice was steady, firm. I won't. His chest tightened. You won't have to. Her eyes searched his, waiting for the lie, waiting for the version of him that would grow tired, that would revert, that would revert, that would break her again. But he wasn't that man anymore. I get it now, he admitted softly. I get what I did to you, what I let happen, and I swear to you, Elena, I will never, 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 never let you carry this alone again. A flicker of something crossed her face. Hope, fear, relief. She shifted their son in her arms, glancing at the children before looking back at him. Starts Monday, he confirmed without hesitation. Elena let out a slow breath, like she had been holding it in for months. Then, finally, she took a step forward. She placed their baby into his arms, watching him carefully. Nathan held his son the way he wished he had held everything before, with care, patience, love. And then Elena spoke the words he had been praying for. I think we can try again. His grip on their child tightened just slightly as his breath left him in a shaky exhale. Not forgiveness, not yet, but a second chance. And this time, he wouldn't waste it. Lesson learned from the story. Marriage is not about roles. It's about partnership. It's about teamwork, empathy, and showing up for one another every single day. Too often, one person carries the weight of a home. One person carries the weight of a home, while the other assumes that providing financially is enough. But a marriage built on imbalance will always crack under pressure. Nathan learned the hard way that love isn't just about being present, it's about participation. He had a wife who loved him, children who adored him, and a home that could have been full of warmth, but his negligence turned it into a battlefield. He wasn't cruel, he wasn't abusive, but he was absent. And sometimes absence can hurt just as much as mistreatment. Elena, on the other hand, taught us the power of knowing your worth. She didn't scream or beg for change. She walked away because she understood something many people don't. You cannot force someone to value you. They have to realize it on their own. She gave Nathan a choice: either step up or lose her forever. And most importantly, this story teaches us that change is possible. Nathan had every opportunity to make excuses, to blame his mother, to act like the victim. But he didn't. He chose to grow. He chose to take responsibility. And that made all the difference. So, if there's one thing to take away from this, it's this: marriage isn't about endurance, it's about partnership. If you're the one carrying everything alone, something needs to change. And if you're the one expecting your partner to do it all, it's time to wake up before it's too late. What country are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories and life lessons.